Welcome here today, and I'd like to thank Jennifer for extending the invitation to the Halifax Regional Municipality. We're really happy to be here. We're the local municipal government for the County of Halifax. I'm going to talk about HRM, what we are and what we do, because perhaps you haven't really thought about HRM as being an employer you might think about working with. So I'm going to talk about the type of jobs we offer. And then I'm going to talk about the interview process, the application process, and give you some tips for that. A lot of like what Cameron had to say. And if I don't answer your questions, certainly ask them at the Q&A session, and I'd be happy to answer them. So you'll have to bear with me of controlling this and getting my notes, and so I just ask for your patience on that. So HRM is a large employer here in our region. We have about 6,000 full-time and part-time positions in the municipality. Now, some of those are summer positions, some of those are term positions, but generally we have about 6,000 people on staff. So 6,000 positions offers a lot of diversity in what we have to offer. So we provide residents services to the residents of HRM, and we have offices primarily in downtown Halifax, downtown Dartmouth, out in Sackville. We have an office at the West End Mall. We have an office in the Eric Spicer building, which is in the Westfall area of Dartmouth. And then we have a lot of other offices throughout the entire county of HRM. And a lot of those would be the recreation sites, fire departments, things like that. So just briefly what HRM has to offer. We have challenging and dynamic career opportunities because of our size, because of the services we provide. We have a lot of different types of jobs with HRM. Once you're an employee of HRM, we have a lot of professional development opportunities, and staff, a lot of those are provided in-house, and staff is certainly encouraged to continue their education with outside training agencies, whether it's a university, whether it's a community college, and we cost share in any expenses associated with that. And we have competitive salaries. Now, HRM, we are governed by a few unions. We have 5 in total. So a lot of our salaries are determined by the collective bargaining process. And our non-union ones, we've gone through a non-union compensation review, and we think our salaries are quite competitive and quite comparative. So what we can offer a commitment to diversity in the workplace, whether that's the jobs, whether or not it's the opportunities. We have a commitment to maintaining a work-life balance. That's really important for us, for people to be able to manage their work, their home life, their further education, and we really make an effort to accommodate that. And you know, it gives you an opportunity to work in your community, whether or not you're building the 4-pad arena, you know, have an opportunity to participate in that. Maybe you're building roads, maybe you have an interest in that, or in education and in engineering. You know, we build a lot of roads around here. We have the Armdale Roundabout, which was one of our huge projects. So working and living in this community, you get to appreciate the things that you can be part of building. So just a little bit about what we do. We are a government structure. We have the mayor and council, and the chief administrative officer reports to council. And the chief administrative officer oversees all the staff. It's his responsibility to oversee all the different business units in HRM. We have community development. That's the group that's really out in the community, the recreation centers, the civic events, and you know, the planners, the community developers, things like that. That's community development. We have business planning and information systems management. What that's all about is mostly our IT section. So we hire a lot of positions that require IT background. In our finance department, they're responsible for our corporate financial management, and as a result of that, a lot of finance-based positions are available there. Just going to take a drink of water. So you get into accountants, a lot of opportunity for people with their CMAs, CAs working for HRM. We have the Halifax Regional Police, and I'm sure you're very familiar with them. They provide a great service to the citizens of HRM. We have Human Resources, that's the business unit that I work with, and we typically hire their people with an HR background. Infrastructure and Asset Management, that's the business unit, one of the business units that I support, and that's where we look after the roads, building our buildings, capital projects that you see going on in HRM. Legal services, lawyers, and legal professionals are hired by that business unit, and they provide legal advice to council and HRM staff. And Transportation and Public Works. Now that's a group, it's very diverse. Transportation and Public Works, that's our solid waste group, that's our transit group, that's the fleet group that looks after all our HRM vehicles. So what has HRM done? We have adopted an employment equity policy. We adopted that back in 1997. We have designated recruitments in HRM. We've had designated recruitments in police. We've had designated recruitments with the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency. We have accessible work locations. And we do outreach work. I've done some work with WorkBridge, and any opportunity that provides, we're certainly open to that. We do work accommodations, and we encourage people to self-identify when they're applying for positions at HRM. So I'll talk now about applying for positions with the Halifax Regional Municipality. We have a new online recruitment system, and you go to www.halifax.ca, and you can do all your applying online. And any position that is open to the public is posted there on our website. And you just go through the process. And talking about screening and things like that, attached to each one of our job postings will be questionnaires. And those questionnaires are around, are you a Canadian citizen? It gives you an opportunity to self-identify. But then there will be another questionnaire specific to the job that you're applying for. So if you had a background in civil engineering, we'll say, you took maybe your degree of civil engineering, or you took civil engineering technology at NSCC, we would ask specific questions around the qualifications for that position. So we would be asking you in that second questionnaire if you had your degree in civil engineering or if you had your diploma in civil engineering technology, and then we would be asking you about your experience and any other qualifications that we require for the job. So that's kind of where our screening tool fits in with our online recruiting system. So it's not a matter of putting in key names and hoping that the system pick it up. We're actually getting you to respond to questions that we're asking you that will screen you in or screen you out of a competition. So before you apply for a job, there are always some considerations you should make. So you look at the job that you're applying for, and this is where you do that self-assessment and say, do I have the qualifications to do the job? And consider your education, consider your experience, look at your resume, and really ask yourself, am I qualified for this position? Do I possess the knowledge that HRM is looking for? So on our general job ads, we'll have, a summary of the position. Then we'll get into more detail about what the duties are. And then we'll get into the educational requirements, and we will screen against those. And then we'll get into the knowledge that's required for the job. So ask yourself, do I have the qualifications and do I have the knowledge to do this job? And when you're looking at those duties, is this a job that I, would like to do? We have our work conditions listed on our job descriptions. One of the individuals talked about lifting, all the work conditions are on our job descriptions. And, look at the duties and say, is that something that I would really like to do? And is it a work location that I can get to? Do I drive a car? Do I take the bus? Do buses go in that direction? So these are all things that you really need to consider and stop and think about before you apply for a job. So the selection process, we'll talk a little bit about how that works. And you've applied for a job, and now the employer, and I'm sure this is pretty much the same at any work site, but we are going to screen your resume against the qualifications. And like I say, those are done online now, but we are still going to look at your resume even though you screen in online. We're still going to, closely look at that and make sure you do have the qualifications. So if you are screened in, you will be contacted for an interview or testing, whatever that may be. There may be different phases to the selection process. So whether it's testing or whether it's the interview, it's part of the selection process. And someone mentioned this morning about, I apply for all these jobs, I never hear back. And built into our online application system is an opportunity to let people know that their application was actually received by HRM. What did I do there? Did I do something? There we go. So, I'm not touching this, so I don't know what's happening. I think he's playing with it there. So I can keep talking. Oh, there we go. Excellent. So we will contact you electronically to let you know that your resume has been received by HRM. Now, I've always been asked that question, I never hear back, and, I never know if you're considering my application or not. And my response is, if anybody applies to HRM, I never mind you giving me a call to say, did you get my resume? Have I been screened in? What steps are you at in the process? And we will provide that information to any candidate that gives us a call. And, maybe your resume is not quite right, and maybe we can provide some tips around, how to make your resume better. But don't ever hesitate in calling to say, what stage am I at in the process, or am I being considered? And we'll certainly provide that information to you at Human Resources. So the successful candidate will be selected through testing and interviews. References will be conducted, and the positions are awarded. Now, just talking about your resume, I know it was talked about this morning, but it being a marketing tool, and that's what your resume is. It's the first impression you're making to an organization. So you really need to do it right. So it's used to assess your qualifications, and if, sorry, see, I can't do all of this at the same time. There we go. So you want to make sure on that resume that your resume reflects the qualifications that you possess. And if we are asking for something on that job posting and you have it, make sure you have it on your resume or in your covering letter. And we do read both. So it's always good to summarize what's in your resume into your covering letter. So the highlights are in your covering letter, and it's more detail there in your resume. And it's very important to be truthful, because we will be verifying what you have to say. And it's critical that you customize each covering letter and each resume to the position you are applying for. Now, I'm with a government organization, and a lot of applications come through and say, I'm applying for a job at your company. Well, we're not a company. So that's really where it's important that you pay attention, and you've heard a lot today about doing research about the organization you're applying for, and that's where it's really important, and that's where it really starts to show through that you're paying attention to what you're applying for. So make sure that covering letter is right, that you've covered the qualifications, if you have them, that we're asking for in that job posting. So the interview, how to prepare. And my belief is that if you're applying for a job and you are very interested and you think you have an opportunity of being screened in, start preparing for the interview when you apply. Because you may get a fair amount of notice of when your interview is going to be, or you may not. So get started and start preparing for your interview. And, a lot of those skills are transferable from one interview to the other. So, if you're attending a lot of interviews, it's an opportunity to learn from each one that you're attending. So how do I prepare for the interview? So confirm your interview location and arrive early. And whether or not you have to make a visit to that site the day before or earlier in the day, but make sure you know exactly where you're going. And Cameron talked a bit about, the interview questions and how those are crafted, but typically at HRM, our interviews consist of knowledge questions based on the knowledge required for the position, and the other ones are primarily behavioral event. So we're going to want you to tell us about a time, when, and those questions are related to the competencies that are listed in the job description. So it could be on customer service, it could be on analytical thinking, it could be on valuing diversity. We ask a very broad range of questions based on the competencies required for each job. So in preparing for that interview, I encourage you to really know the job description, the knowledge that we're looking for, and anticipate what questions we may ask. And if you're attending a lot of interviews, you may have a really good idea of what that might be. And write out some questions, and then find a friend or a partner or somebody that will do some role playing, or stand in front of the mirror or whatever. But you say, okay, so they're going to ask me a question on customer service, okay, so I'll talk about that. Or teamwork, yeah, I did that, I know all about teamwork. But when you get to the interview, if you don't practice, what is in your head does not come out the way you think it's going to come out and the way you want it to come out unless you practice. So I can't stress that enough, that you really have to put some effort into practicing and preparing for those questions. Oh, see? Messing it up again. Okay, so these are my top 5 tips. So my top 5 tips is the first one is to do it right. And that's the resume, the covering letter, and the interview. All of them take time in preparing to do them right. Consider it a job to get a job. So whether or not you put something in your iPhone or whatever those things are, to make an appointment with yourself twice a week to be checking websites that you're interested in working at, do that on a regular basis. We put jobs on our website, external positions on our website, probably every couple of days. So you should be going on and checking the website a couple of times a week of companies that you'd like to work for. The interview, do it right, put your best foot forward, and be prepared. And keep current. And whether that's through professional development or reading material, but be current and be able to demonstrate that in your interview. And that's really important. And somebody today mentioned volunteer work, and that's very important too, to be able to draw on that during the interview process. Now, check for errors. Now, I don't know if I should say that word or not, but a lot of people don't. And depending on the job that you're applying for, errors can cost you the job. So I'm going to say the word, and if I'm offending anybody, my apologies. But obviously this individual, and this actually crossed my desk, that they didn't really check. So they said, I work in, they were intending to say shift, and they said shit. So that's going to get you in trouble. That's not going to screen you in. And then this other one, I mean, they're all askew with the dates. So I ask you to be very careful and to make sure that you're really checking for those areas. So those are my top 5 tips, and I'll be happy to answer any more specific questions that you have. Thank you.